Part 1. The Most Dangerous Superstition. Starting with the punchline. How many millions have gazed upon the brutal horrors of history, with its countless examples of man's inhumanity to man, and wondered aloud how such things could happen? The truth is, most people wouldn't want to know how it happens, because they themselves are religiously attached to the very belief that makes it possible. The vast majority of suffering and injustice in the world today, and spanning back thousands of years, can be directly attributed to a single idea. It is not greed or hatred or any of the other emotions or ideas that are usually blamed for the evils of society. Instead, most of the violence, theft, assault, and murder in the world is the result of a mere superstition, a belief which, though almost universally held, runs contrary to all evidence and reason. Though, of course, those who hold the belief do not see it that way. The punchline of this book is easy to express, albeit difficult for most people to accept, or even to calmly and rationally contemplate. The belief in authority, which includes all belief in government, is irrational and self-contradictory. It is contrary to civilization and morality, and constitutes the most dangerous, destructive superstition that has ever existed. Rather than being a force for order and justice, the belief in authority is the arch-enemy of humanity. Of course, nearly everyone is raised to believe the exact opposite, that obedience to authority is a virtue, at least in most cases, that respecting and complying with the laws of government is what makes us civilized, and that disrespect for authority leads only to chaos and violence. In fact, people have been so thoroughly trained to associate obedience with being good that attacking the concept of authority will sound, to most people, like suggesting that there is no such thing as right and wrong. No need to abide by any standards of behavior, no need to have any morals at all. That is not what is being advocated here, quite the opposite. Indeed, the reason the myth of authority needs to be demolished is precisely because there is such a thing as right and wrong. It does matter how people treat each other, and people should always strive to live moral lives. Despite the constant authoritarian propaganda claiming otherwise, having respect for authority and having respect for humanity are mutually exclusive and diametrically opposed. The reason to have no respect for the myth of authority is so that we can have respect for humanity and justice. There is a harsh contrast between what we are taught is the purpose of authority, to create a peaceful, civilized society, and the real-world results of authority in action. Flip through any history book, and you will see that most of the injustice and destruction that has occurred throughout the world was not the result of people breaking the law, but rather the result of people obeying and enforcing the laws of various governments. The evils that have been committed in spite of authority are trivial compared to the evils that have been committed in the name of authority. Nevertheless, children are still taught that peace and justice come from authoritarian control, and that despite the flagrant evils committed by authoritarian regimes around the world throughout history, they are still morally obligated to respect and obey the current government of their own country. They are taught that doing as you're told is synonymous with being a good person, and that playing by the rules is synonymous with doing the right thing. On the contrary, being a moral person requires taking on the personal responsibility of judging right from wrong and following one's own conscience, the opposite of respecting and obeying authority. The reason it is so important that people understand this fact is that the primary danger posed by the myth of authority is to be found not in the minds of the controllers in government, but in the minds of those being controlled. One nasty individual who loves to dominate others is a trivial threat to humanity unless a lot of other people view such domination as legitimate because it is achieved via the laws of government. The twisted mind of Adolf Hitler, by itself, posed little or no threat to humanity. It was the millions of people who viewed Hitler as authority, and thus felt obligated to obey his commands and carry out his orders, who actually caused the damage done by the Third Reich. In other words, the problem is not that evil people believe in authority, the problem is that basically good people believe in authority. and as a result end up advocating and even committing acts of aggression, injustice, and oppression, even murder. The average statist, one who believes in government, while lamenting all the ways in which authority has been used as a tool for evil even in his own country, will still insist that it is possible for government to be a force for good, and will still imagine...
If you are waiting around for a politician to preserve your liberties, or to protect your family, or to protect you, you're a failure. And I don't know how else to put it. Men are especially under attack right now. Those men that believe in traditional standards of what they're supposed to do as men, as husbands, as fathers, as protectors, as providers, they're all being told that these are toxic attributes. When you look at things like a capacity and a capability for violence, those are not toxic in and of themselves. They're morally neutral. And I will tell you this, if the good guys don't know how to use those things, they're going to be ruled by the bad guys.
Long enough. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's not misinformation or disinformation anymore. What we had speculated and what we questioned early on is now a reality. If the men and women in uniform don't stand up to this, who will? This is a war. It's not a physical one, not yet, other than the injuries. But it's a war of the mind, and it's a psychological one. Most men and women who have been in combat or trained for it didn't see it for what it really is. There's still a very large percentage of good soldiers in the military trying to figure this out, just like everyone else. So, but what this country has become and continuing to become is pretty evident, and it's obvious what is happening to our freedom and rights. So I think it's time we admit we are all duped on a massive scale, and we give our heads a shake and try and drop the ego. If we allow this to continue to happen, there is no future for this country or our children. And I have a quote I found online that resonated with me, and it was by Jose Rizal. He was a Filipino writer in the late 1800s. And the quote is, "There can be no tyrants where there are no slaves." So stop being a modern slave.
Walking around, head in the clouds, I wanna wake up to a dead in the grave. But it is too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real.
If you can persuade them that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening. And they have.
It's not rocket science, folks. Time to stop being captured, domesticated, hackable, zombified, modern-day slaves.
This whole COVID madness, this so-called pandemic, it was just a test balloon. A gigantic test balloon. Well, for what, you ask? Well, to see how far they could go. To see what exactly they would have to do to get free individuals in a free and democratic society to consent to being forced into compliance. That's what they were trying to establish. That's what they were trying to figure out. And they have figured out. Trust me, they are much smarter now. The goal ultimately is to transform our free and democratic societies, into totalitarian societies. Their goal is to strip each and every one of us of our fundamental rights of freedom, democracy, the rule of law. They want to get rid of all of this. This whole COVID thing had never anything to do with public health. It never had anything to do with breaking waves. It always had to do with breaking people in order to make us a part of a mindless, malleable mass, which they can totally control, and we will be completely dependent upon this globalitarian elite. So I'm really imploring the people and all the peoples around the world, for God's sake, stop giving your democratically elected governments the benefit of the doubt. They are not deserving of that. They are not. Stop rationalizing whatever your government is doing. Stop rationalizing and come up with some good intentions. They have no good intentions. Never. As I said before, in the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political elite concerned about the well-being of regular people. And it isn't any different now. Why should it? Stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. Because I can tell you, you cannot comply your way out of a tyranny. It is impossible. Trying to do so, you will only feed a gigantic alligator in the hopes of being eaten last. But guess what? Your turn will come, and then you will be the one swallowed up. I also have to ask the people, end your silence. Speak up. For God's sake, stop complying. Start rebelling. They're out to get you if you do not resist.
To anybody out there still listening, this will be our last transmission.
There comes a time in every man's life
when he has to stop looking up to his heroes and become one himself.
Doesn't matter who you voted for,
or what kind of car you drive, or what the man on the news has to say.
Just take a look around. This ain't the life we fought for.
Our world is under siege.
Our nation is in peril.
And our people are divided.
We've sacrificed too much for our freedom to let it slip away now. The world doesn't need more billionaires.
The world doesn't need more politicians. The world needs heroes. And you don't need X-ray vision. You don't need to fly. You don't need to look cool on the cover of a comic book. You just need to realize what you're made of. And you are the few. You are the strong. You are the brave.